Imagine waking up one morning, and overnight, your life savings have lost half their value. The price of rice has doubled, your bank is closed, the company your family worked for has gone bankrupt, and the government is telling you this all happened because of one man, sitting in an office in New York. This is not a hypothetical. This happened to millions of real people across Southeast Asia. In 1997 and 1998, some of the fastest-growing economies on Earth collapsed, almost overnight. And at the center of the story is a man named George Soros, a billionaire trader who saw a weakness in the global financial system and bet billions of dollars that it would crack. He was right, and the fallout changed the course of history for an entire region. This is the story of the 1997 Asian financial crisis, how it happened, how one man profited from it, and why some of the world's leaders called him the most dangerous man on Earth. To understand how this crisis happened, we need to go back to the early 1990s. Southeast Asia was the envy of the world. Countries like Thailand, Indonesia, Malaysia, South Korea, and the Philippines were growing at 7 to 10% a year. For over a decade straight, they were called the Asian Tigers, and the roar was deafening. Foreign investors were pouring money in, skyscrapers were rising, a new middle class was being born, Bangkok was building a subway system, Jakarta was modernizing its ports, Kuala Lumpur was constructing the tallest buildings on Earth, the Petronas Towers. For many people living through it, it felt like nothing could stop the momentum. But beneath the surface, cracks were forming. Most of this growth was built on debt, specifically debt borrowed in US dollars. Here is why that matters. If a Thai company borrows money in US dollars, it still earns its revenue in Thai baht. If the baht falls in value against the dollar, suddenly that company owes far more money than it originally borrowed, in real terms. This was the trap, and almost nobody was paying attention to it. These governments were also pegging their currencies to the US dollar, meaning they fixed the exchange rate artificially. This looked like stability, but it was a fragile illusion, because maintaining that peg required the central bank to spend its foreign reserves every time investors tried to sell the local currency. The reserves were not unlimited, and the debt was growing. By 1996, Thailand alone had a current account deficit of around 8% of its GDP. Its banks were loaded with bad loans, particularly in real estate, and it had less than $40 billion in foreign reserves to defend a currency that hundreds of billions of dollars of debt depended on. In short, Asia was a ticking clock, and someone was about to start the countdown. George Soros is not a name that belongs in a typical Wall Street story. He was born in Budapest, Hungary, in 1930. As a teenager, he lived through the Nazi occupation of his city, surviving by using false papers and hiding his Jewish identity. That experience of watching an entire reality collapse around him would shape how he saw the world for the rest of his life. After the war, he fled communist Hungary, made his way to London, studied philosophy at the London School of Economics, and eventually moved to New York. In 1970, he co-founded a hedge fund, later known as the Quantum Fund, and over the next 2 decades, turned it into one of the most profitable investment vehicles in history, averaging more than 30% in annual returns. His edge was not stock picking, it was macroeconomics. He studied governments, currencies, central banks, and policies, and he looked for moments when the market's perception of reality was out of step with actual reality. He called this the theory of reflexivity, the idea that investors don't just observe markets, they participate in shaping them, that beliefs can become self-fulfilling, and in 1992, he proved just how powerful this idea could be. The British pound was part of a fixed exchange rate system called the European Exchange Rate Mechanism. Soros believed the UK economy was too weak to maintain its peg, so he borrowed and sold over £10 billion, betting the British government would be forced to devalue. They fought back, raising interest rates to 15% in a single day to try to make holding pounds attractive. It wasn't enough. Within hours, Soros had won. The UK crashed out of the system. The pound fell. Soros made more than $1 billion in a single day. The press called it Black Wednesday. They called him the man who broke the Bank of England. 5 years later, he was looking at Asia, and he liked what he saw. So, how exactly do you profit from a currency collapse? Let me walk you through it. It is a strategy called short selling, and here is the simple version. Say I believe the Thai baht is about to fall in value. Here is what I do. First, I borrow a large amount of baht from a bank, let's say the equivalent of $1 billion worth of baht. Second, I immediately sell all of that baht in the currency market in exchange for US dollars. Now I hold dollars and I owe baht. Third, I wait. I am betting the baht will weaken. If it does, I can buy back all that bought later for far fewer dollars than I received when I sold it. Fourth, I return the bought to the lender, and I keep the difference as pure profit. The bigger the crash, the bigger the profit. Now, imagine doing this not with $1 billion, but with $10 billion, across multiple currencies simultaneously. That is what the Quantum Fund and a handful of other major hedge funds began doing in early 1997. Thailand was their first target. They identified all the warning signs, the bad loans, the overvalued peg, the thin reserves. They began quietly building enormous short positions against the Thai baht throughout late 1996 and early 1997. When they finally applied serious pressure in May 1997, the Bank of Thailand fought back, spending billions of dollars from its reserves trying to prop up the currency. It was like trying to hold back the tide with your hands. On July 2, 1997, Thailand surrendered. They abandoned the peg and let the baht float freely. It immediately crashed, losing 15% of its value that day alone, and eventually falling more than 50% over the following months. Soros and his fund walked away with an estimated $700 million in profit from Thailand alone, but they were not done. What happened next was a financial wildfire. When Thailand collapsed, investors across the world asked a single terrifying question: if Thailand can fall, who is next? And once that question was in the air, the answer became inevitable. Because the act of asking it, of pulling money out of Asia in a panic, made the other currencies weaker. Soros's theory of reflexivity playing out in real time. Within weeks, the Philippine peso came under attack, then the Malaysian ringgit, then the Indonesian rupiah, then the South Korean won. In Indonesia, the situation became catastrophic. President Suharto's government had built an economy riddled with corruption and cronyism. When the rupiah began to fall, the panic was total. The government closed 16 banks overnight in November 1997, triggering bank runs as ordinary citizens rushed to withdraw whatever cash they could. The rupiah, which had been trading at around 2,500 to the US dollar before the crisis, eventually crashed to nearly 16,000 to the dollar, a loss of more than 80% of its value. In South Korea, the situation was so severe that the country nearly ran out of foreign currency reserves completely. By December 1997, they had less than a week's worth of reserves left. The government went to the IMF and asked for the largest bailout in that institution's history at the time, $57 billion. Across the region, the human cost was staggering. In Indonesia, poverty rates that had been falling for decades reversed overnight. Millions of people fell back below the poverty line. In South Korea, unemployment tripled. In Thailand, construction halted. Half-finished skeletons of towers stood frozen across Bangkok for years. An entire generation's wealth, built over decades, was wiped out in months. As the scale of the destruction became clear, one man became the face of it all, George Soros. And no one made that case more loudly, or more colorfully, than the Prime Minister of Malaysia, Mahathir Mohamad. Mahathir was already a polarizing figure, a nationalist, a strongman, someone who had always been suspicious of Western financial power, and now he had his villain. At the IMF and World Bank annual meeting in Hong Kong in September 1997, Mahathir stood up and delivered a speech that shocked the room. He called currency speculation, and Soros specifically, unnecessary, unproductive, and immoral. He called the free market in currencies a threat to developing nations. He later went even further in press conferences, calling Soros a moron, a rogue, and a criminal. Soros fired back publicly, calling Mahathir a menace to his own country and saying that blaming him for the crisis was like blaming a thermometer for a fever. Mahathir did not stop at words. In September 1998, he took the radical step of imposing capital controls, locking money inside Malaysia, and forbidding it from leaving. He pegged the ringgit back to the dollar at a fixed rate. The financial establishment was horrified. Remarkably, it worked, at least in the short term. Malaysia recovered faster than its neighbors, who had accepted IMF bailouts with brutal austerity conditions attached. In Indonesia, as the economy collapsed, so did the Suharto regime. After 32 years in power, Suharto was forced to resign in May 1998 as riots tore through Jakarta. More than 1,000 people died in the unrest. The crisis had destabilized an entire nation. There was a broad sense across Asia that they had been preyed upon, that the rules of the global financial game were written by those who already had money. So, was George Soros responsible for the Asian financial crisis? The honest answer is, it is complicated. Most economists agree that the structural weaknesses were already there. The bad debt, the corrupt banking systems, the overvalued pegs. Soros did not create those. He found them. Currency speculators are like a stress test. They expose weaknesses. They don't build the cracks. they find them and push. Soros himself has always maintained this position. He argues he was operating legally within the rules of a free market, and that the real culprits were the governments and institutions that allowed the vulnerabilities to build up in the first place. But critics make a powerful counter-argument. Yes, the vulnerabilities existed, but the speed and scale of the collapse, the sheer devastation that fell on millions of ordinary people, was accelerated enormously by the speculative attacks. Soros didn't light the fire, but he poured petrol on it, and he did so knowing full well that people would get burned. There is also a deeper question of fairness. When you have the ability to move markets with the sheer size of your bets, you are not just predicting an outcome, you are helping cause it. That raises real questions about whether the rules governing that kind of power are adequate. What is certain is this: George Soros made an estimated $2 billion from the Asian crisis, and millions of people across Southeast Asia paid the price. The 1997 Asian financial crisis didn't just destroy currencies, it redrew the political map of the region. It ended governments. It reshaped how developing nations think about foreign debt, financial openness, and the power of Western capital. Many of the countries hit hardest rebuilt themselves and came back stronger. South Korea transformed into a global economic powerhouse. Indonesia stabilized. Thailand recovered. But the memory of 1997 never left. To this day, the countries of Southeast Asia hold some of the largest foreign currency reserves in the world, a direct consequence of that crisis. They will never again be caught without the ammunition to defend their currencies. And George Soros? He remains one of the most controversial figures alive, a philanthropist who has given away billions, a political actor who funds causes worldwide, and to many across Asia, still the man who, in a single trade, helped bring a continent to its knees. Whether you see him as a brilliant trader playing by the rules of the game, or as a predator who profited from human suffering, the story of 1997 forces us to ask a question that still has no easy answer. In a world where money can move faster than governments can react, who is responsible for the consequences? If you found this story interesting, hit subscribe. We cover the biggest turning points in global economics and the people behind them. And let us know in the comments, do you think Soros was a villain, a scapegoat, or just a very good trader doing what the system allowed him to do? I'll see you in the next one.